All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Happy Erev Thanksgiving, and very time that people are in celebration mode and enjoyment mode. So hope you'll enjoy the next few days. Today, I want to talk about maybe appropriately, because Thanksgiving for most people is about food. So we'll talk about one of the food episodes in the Torah,
Mhm.
something which obviously has a basic meaning, has a simple level of understanding, but there's a very profound, deeper understanding to this whole episode in the Torah. We're going to talk about the the episode of Yitzchak wanting to bless his son and how that all played out. So let's read through some of the text quickly and then get to some of the commentary later. Begins chapter 27 in this week's Torah portion of Toldos. And in this section, we have Yitzchak is getting older, and Yitzchak becomes blind, or his eyes become dim, basically becomes blind. Yitzchak got older, he is now blind. Vayikras Eisav ben Hagadol, he calls to his older son, Eisav, and he says to him, Bini, my son, Vayomer Elav Hineni. He says, here I am. Verse number 2. He says, I have gotten old, I am getting old. Lo yadaiti yom moisi, I do not know the day of my death. Now, interestingly, Yitzchak lives another 50 years, close to 60 years, actually. So Yitzchak has another 60 years of life left. But why is he saying I've become old? He says, because I am getting close to the age that my mother was when she passed away. Yitzchak's mother, Sarah, passed away when she was 127. So he at this point was 123, which means he was within 5 years of the age of his mother's passing. And that, says the Talmud, is one should be concerned. 5 years before and 5 years after the age of one's parents passing, one should be concerned. Talmud's not saying you should be worried or concerned, but maybe that there's certain things that one should do to be prepared in the event that it is their time is coming to an end. Moving on, he says, now, sharpen your weapons, your sword, your arrows, and go out and trap me some ownerless game, bring some food. Verse number 4. Make for me delicacies as I like them, and bring them to me so that I may eat. So that I may give you a blessing, b'terem, almost before I die. So let's stop here. Verse number 4 already has within it numerous ideas. Firstly, why, if he wants to bless Yitzchak, why does he have to have food? Why is his blessing dependent on the food? And why mat'amim, which means make for me delicacies? Shouldn't it be make for me a delicacy? Why delicacies? So both of these issues are addressed. The first is, and this happens to be a very practical idea, and that is that we are taught from a mystical standpoint that in order for one to receive a blessing, they should do something, they should provide something in order for that blessing to happen. So over here, Yitzchak says, I want to give you a bracha, but I also know that the only way the bracha happens is if you, I don't know if the word is earn it, but you give something toward, create a vessel, that's the word, to create a vessel to receive that blessing. You providing food to me will make the vessel in which the blessing can reside. This is the reason why when someone makes a blessing, when someone asks we go somewhere, a holy place, a place of prayer, a place of blessing, the tradition is that one should also give a little bit to charity when one is asking for a blessing, because giving to charity creates the vessel into which the bracha could descend into. One has to have a vessel for blessing. there's an interesting halacha, which some are aware of, some are not. And that is that when you finish the meal, when you finish any meal, specifically a meal with bread, you should leave a little bit of bread or a little bit of the food on the plate. Don't finish every last bite of the food. One should leave a little bit of bread. And mystically, the reason for that is because there's different reasons for that halacha. It's a halacha brought down in Jewish law. The mystical reason for that is because if you want blessing, when we're saying Birkas Hamazon, we're asking for divine blessing. If you want blessing to happen, you have to have something there upon which the bracha can descend. There's this idea there has to be a vessel for that blessing. And that's a halacha until today, and when a person's eating. So this idea is true here too. That Yitzchak says, I want there to be food that you prepare for me. That'll become the vessel into which I can give blessing. Okay. A second idea, which the Tanya talks about in this pasuk, is the point which I started already, which is, why does he say, Aseli matamin? Make for me delicacies. Why not a delicacy? There's a food that I like, make it for me. Instead, somehow the idea is that there's plural. There's two different types of foods. The Tanya applies this to an interesting idea, and that is that God too has two foods, quote, so to say, metaphorically speaking, that God enjoys. There's two types of food, sustenance, that we can bring to God, which God says, Asher ahavti, which I like. What are the two different foods that we can prepare to Hashem? So the answer is there's sweet and there's savory. In other words, the flavor, there's the sweet flavor. And sweet, the way that Kabbalah explains, is that which is simply good. Simply good. It's sweet, it tastes good. And that is the avodah, that is the service of tzaddikim. The tzaddik offer one dish to Hashem, and that's the one flavor. That's the flavor which is sweet. It is good, it always was good, it will be good. Sweet food, that's Hashem says, I enjoy that. But then there's a second type of dish that can be presented to Hashem, and that perhaps is the savory. That which has a somewhat of a bite to it. And we enjoy that too, right? We enjoy that which has a sharp flavor. You know, often we put those two together. Gefilte fish is sweet, and you add on it a little bit of chrein, because we like the balance, we like the sharpness. What is this sharp food, metaphorically, that one can bring to Hashem? Says the Tanya, that's the avodah of the Baal Tshuva. It's the avodah of Iskafia. That's the avodah of the one who struggles. It's not sweet. It's not perfect. It doesn't have an easy path. It's sharp. It has an edge. It's challenging. The avodah of someone who is a Baal Tshuva, someone who has to struggle, someone has to overcome their mistakes, someone has to face their Yetzer Hara in a regular way and do battle with it. That is the second dish that Hashem enjoys, and perhaps even more so than this sweet dish. And so therefore the Tanya, Kabbalah says, this is the deeper idea behind the Aseli Matamin, make for me delicacies, is that Yitzchak's words over here are really connected to the words that Hashem says to all of us. And God says, there's two different types of dishes that I enjoy. There's that which is easy and sweet, and that which is just naturally good. And then there is the presentation given to me by someone who has to battle and work hard to serve me, and that has an edge. That is another dish that I enjoy. Okay, so that is the two ideas. That is two ideas on this pasuk. Continuing on, Rivka at this point shoyma'as, verse number 5. The Rivka shoyma'as bedaber Yitzchak el Eisav. Rivka hears that Yitzchak overheard this conversation. That Yitzchak says to Eisav, "Vayelach Eisav asada latzutzai lahad." Eisav goes to the field to catch game, and then to bring it, to find an animal and trap it and bring it. Verse number 6, the Rivka Amra El Yakov ben Alemer. Rivka now turns to Yaakov and says to him, Hine shamati asavicha midaber. I heard your father telling Eisav Lamar, saying, Havi alitzayid, bring for me meat, vaseli matamim, and make for me delicacies for echela, and I will eat it. And then I can bless you lifnei Hashem lifnei Moisi, in the presence of God before I die. And therefore she says, verse number 8. Says, now my son, listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. Lechna alatzayin, I want you to go to the sheep. V'kachli misham shnei gedayi izim. Take from there 2 choice kid goats. Ve'asa oisam matam lavicha, and I will prepare them for your father exactly as he likes it. I'm skipping the Rashi over here because I want to get to certain ideas. And bring it to your father, and he will eat, so that he will bless you before he dies. Okay, let's pause here for a moment. This is a question which one should have as they go through this parsha, and that is, why is it that Yitzchak is enamored by his son Eisav and loves him what seemingly more than Yitzchak, and Rivka loves his son Yaakov, and Rivka loves Yaakov? What is at the core of this disagreement between Yitzchak and Rivka? If we are to read it simply, as it's just parents having favorites, it's firstly, it seems to be a pretty flawed approach to parenting. Really, that you have your favorite and you like this one, you like the other one. And secondly, we're not just talking about any parents. We're talking here about Yitzchak and Rivka. We're talking about one of the patriarchs and one of the matriarchs of the Jewish people. And we're talking about Torah guidance. So that this is somehow the Torah is guiding us in the situation as well. And what guidance can there be from a rather simplistic story of flawed parenting in which one parent likes one parent likes the other, and then Rivka is now going to deceive her husband and send a different child to receive a blessing. So again, if you read it on a basic level, I'm not saying that you should not have a simple reading of the parsha, but if you limit it to that, you're really missing out on the true depth of this parsha and this relationship. And that's where our sages fill us in over here, especially the Kabbalistic sages. Let's say it like this. Yakov and Eisav were not good and bad. Were not good and evil. Yakov and Eisav were two different personas, both of which had the potential to be good or evil. In other words, everyone is put into this world with both the possibility of being good or being evil. And when I say evil doesn't necessarily mean evil, though Eisav was evil. Evil could just be animalistic. Yaakov had a certain tmimus. That's the first thing we hear about Yaakov. Yaakov ish tam. He was genuine, simple, genuine, sincere. That was Yaakov's personality. Eisav yodei tzayed ish sadeh. Eisav was a hunter. Again, at first glance, the Torah seems to be saying Yaakov was studious and righteous, and Eisav was a wild man. But Kabbalistically, the hunter has a very deep soul as well. And that is one who is able to go out and trap game, which mystically means someone who goes into the wild world, is able to challenge the wild world, is ready to meet up with dark forces and able to capture them and trap them and make them beneficial to himself. Mystically speaking, it means a person who can go into a world of unholiness, into that wild world, and trap that which needs to be brought into Kedusha, that which needs to be brought into holiness. Interestingly, if we go back to last week's Torah portion, we find a very similar concept mentioned about the mother of Eisav, which is Rivka. Rivka grew up in a corrupt home, in a corrupt environment. And Avraham sends Eliezer to find her and bring her back. Very much like a hunter, go into the wild and bring back something of value. The Talmud compares Rivka in the house of Lavan and Besuel to a rose among the thorns. Sometimes to get to the rose, you have to go work through the thorns. So Yitzchak felt just like Yitzchak saw Eisav as having this potential, the potential of being able to go out into the wild, dark world and actually bring back holiness from that. Just as his wife, Rivka, was brought back from a wild, unholy home, unholy area. That's what Yitzchak saw in Eisav. And presumably, Rivka saw that in Eisav too. So what happened? So Yaakov was more the straight A student. Yaakov was the student who, from a very early age, was committed to study, was committed to holiness, was righteous. You have a lot of nachas from such a child. Eisav was the wild card. And early on, one can say both Yitzchak and Rivka saw the wildness, but at the same time, the potential of Eisav. But as time went on, Rivka who again grew up in such a home, in such a city. So she had firsthand knowledge of what unholy, of wild behavior would be. As time went on, she realized that Eisav is not capitalizing on his potential, but rather falling deeper and deeper into the wildness which he had sought. In other words, he wasn't using his energy and his wildness to transform and to catch and bring things holy or bring things closer to God, but rather he was falling deeper and deeper into the challenge of the world that he was immersed in. He was becoming a wild person. And that's where the disagreement between Rivka and Eisav was. Rivka and Yitzchak was. Yitzchak never gave up on the ability to bring Eisav back. And not just bring Eisav back, but to channel his energy for Kedusha. And Rivka said, realistically, it's not happening. Realistically, Eisav is too far gone. One of the unique differences between, we have Abraham who has two sons, one being Yitzchak, one being Ishmael. Yitzchak follows Abraham's path, Ishmael does not. Yitzchak has two sons, one is Eisav, one is Yakov. Again, similar, right? But there's a very critical difference. And that is at the end of his life, Ishmael does tshuva. Ishmael, it says, did tshuva. We derived this from a pasuk in last week's Torah portion. Eisav never does tshuva. In fact, he dies in an act of defiance against Yaakov. But the point is, Yitzchak never gives up on his son. In fact, it says Yitzchak, again, we see the back and forth between the simple meaning of the parsha and the deeper metaphoric meaning of the parsha. It says Yitzchak, what do we find him doing in this week's parsha? Digging wells. What is the quality of digging wells? The quality of digging wells is a person who has the fortitude and the patience and the persistence to dig and dig until you find water. It means get through the dirt, get past the dirt. And if you run into a more denser, thicker dirt, just dig a little bit more deeply, work harder, use stronger tools, but not to give up until you find the water. So that's what digging a well requires. So our sages say mystically, Yitzchak had that quality with Eisav too. He said, yes, there's dirt, but I believe that if I dig and I dig further and I keep on digging, I will find the water. And I'm not giving up on finding the water that is at the potential of Eisav. Interestingly, we have several examples in Judaism where someone who had a wild side was able to channel that wildness, not just to be good, but to be a superpower in holiness. One such person who had similar features to Eisav is David HaMelech, King David. It says, just as Eisav had a reddish complexion and a wild side, so David had a red complexion, red beard, he had a reddish complexion, and a wild side and a very passionate side. But David was able to channel, and that's what you look through the Tehillim. You see the energy, the passion that he has. He went to war. He used that wild side. Firstly, he used the wild side to be victorious in one war after another, to bring the Jewish people to its strongest state. The land of Israel at the time, he handed it over to his son Shlomo Melech. Shlomo didn't have to do any wars. Why? Because his father waged the wars for him. So David HaMelech channeled his wildness to win battles for the Jewish people. Furthermore, we find that it says David HaMelech seems to, and I say seems to intentionally, seems to have committed a sin of passion, right? With Bathsheba, he pursues Bathsheba, even though she seemed to be married to someone. David himself refers to that incident and says, Chatasi, I have sinned. Says he spent the rest of his life doing tshuva. So again, you see David's passionate side. Perhaps you can even say an animalistic side. But David corrects himself, and he does tshuva, and he fasts, and he becomes the pinnacle of Baal tshuva. So Yitzchak saw in Eisav the potential of a David HaMelech, of wildness, which can be channeled for holiness. We're kind of low on time, but another story, and another example of the Talmud, some of you be familiar with, is Reish Lakish, who was a highway robber. And he was able to be brought back to holiness, brought back to Kedusha, and he became one of the most influential voices of the Talmud. So we see, it's not just theoretical. We see this possibility of wildness that when channeled to holiness can become a superpower of Kedusha. Kabbalah talks about that when this wild energy is channeled towards holiness, it is more powerful than that of a tzaddik. The one who is the Yaakov, the one who has almost like is on cruise control, everything doing the right thing throughout life, is certainly very holy, don't get me wrong. But when you can channel the wildness to holiness, one perhaps that wild neshama, the neshama which has that wild side, is channeled to kedusha, it could accomplish more. And that's what Yitzchak saw in Eisav. And that's why he wanted to give him the bracha. Again, you read the story simply, it seems to come across, Yitzchak was entirely unaware of Eisav's behavior, but that can't be the case. It can't be the case. Firstly, Yitzchak is Yitzchak. Secondly, who doesn't know their child? To be so disillusioned, to be so unaware. A moment also, just previously in the parsha, it said Yitzchak went blind, and Rashi says one of the reasons is because of the wives that his son Eisav chose. So Yitzchak was certainly aware, to some degree for sure, of Esav's behavior. But rather, the disagreement between him and Rivka came down to, Yitzchak said, maybe the one last thing I could do which can redirect him onto a holy path is give him these blessings. And Rivka says, no. At the place where Eisav is at right now, any blessing you give him is only going to be used to strengthen the current path he's on, which is a very wild and animalistic path. So that's the disagreement. Rivka says the brachas can't be given to Eisav, because he's going to use that energy to further his current unholy agenda. Again, she perhaps didn't disagree with Yitzchak theoretically. Theoretically, yes, if we can turn Eisav around, it'll be tremendous kedusha. But practically, she said, he's not there right now. And therefore, Yaakov needs to have this bracha. And that's how the Mefarshim explained the disagreement over here. It's not a simplistic disagreement of, this is my favorite child and this is my favorite child. This is a very deeply rooted mystical disagreement about the potential of holiness that exists within Eisav or not. And Yitzchak never gave up. And Rivka said, right now, Yaakov is the one who will benefit from this bracha, and Eisav will not. She said, not only that, again, different works of Kabbalah say, if Yaakov gets this bracha, perhaps he will be able to then assist Eisav in the process of tshuva. If Yaakov has his blessing, maybe at some point he'll be able to influence Eisav. But Eisav getting this bracha will not be helpful at all. So that's how we understand this thing. I want to jump ahead a little bit. So Yaakov says to his mother, I am a hairy man, I am a smooth-skinned man, Eisav is hairy. What if my father touches me and he'll know that I'm an imposter and he'll curse me? To which she says, I accept the curses. And then he follows what she says. He brings her the food. Rivka then brings the clothing of Eisav, and she gives them to Yaakov, as well as the kid goat skins on his arm and his neck, so that he feels like a hairy skinned person. She gives him the delicacies, verse 17, and the bread, in verse number 18, and he then, Vayavo el Aviv, and he enters into his father's room, Vayomer Avi, and he says, my father, Vayomer Hineni, and his father says, I am here. Mi ata bini. Who are you, my son? To which Yaakov responds, Vayomer Yaakov el Aviv, Yaakov responds to his father, Anoichi Eisav b'chayrecha. Anoichi Eisav b'chayrecha, which simply means, I am Eisav, your firstborn. But our sages point out that his choice of words were carefully chosen. He said it in such a way where, instead of it being an outright lie, it was more of bending of the truth. In which he said, Anoichi Eisav b'chayrecha, which you could, if you put the comma differently, it could be, he says to his father, Anoichi, you want to know who it is? It's I. And then, Eisav b'chayrecha, Eisav is your firstborn. Now, let's also remember, very important to remember over here, Yaakov had acquired the right to the firstborn, right at the beginning of the parsha. When Eisav asks him for food, he says, I'll give you the food on condition you sell me the firstborn. So, to some degree, to a large degree, he actually had earned this blessing also. But nonetheless, for whatever reason, and the Mefarshim talk about it, for whatever reason, Eisav wasn't aware of that, and therefore Yaakov wasn't going to tell him this now. Instead, he said, it is I, Eisav is your firstborn. Again, on a simple level, he was being dishonest, but it was a bending of the truth, pretty serious bend, but it was bending of the truth. And by the way, halachically, we derive from this, that even in situations where there may be a legitimate reason, halachic reason to bend the truth, and there are such situations. There's some situations where for shalom bayis, or because of a danger, or not to frighten someone. The Talmud talks about circumstances in which a person can be dishonest. But even if you have halachic permission to be dishonest, one should avoid saying an outright lie. One should avoid saying yes if the answer is no, or no if the answer is yes. If possible, one should, like Yaakov did over here, where he twisted his words a little bit so that it can be bent. So it's not completely dishonest, because sheker is a terrible midah, is a terrible characteristic, and therefore one should avoid speaking an outright sheker. So this is what happens over here. He says, I am Eisav, your firstborn. Asisi kasher dibarti elai. I did as you told me. Kumna shva va'achle mitzedi. Now you could eat from my game. Ba'avur tevarachani, so you may bless me, your soul's blessing. Fine. Verse 20, Yitzchak says, wow, you came here very quickly. And he says, yes, God assisted me. Verse 21, Yitzchak says to Yaakov, Kshana, please come close so that I may touch you and feel you. Are you really my son Eisav? And verse 22, and this is the verse that I want to spend the rest of our time on. Vayigash Yaakov el Yitzchak. Yaakov approaches Yitzchak. Vayimu shehu. And Yitzchak touches him. Vayomer, and he says, Hakol kol Yaakov. The voice is the voice of Yaakov. Vahayadayim yidei Eisav, and the hands are the hands of Eisav. Okay. And then he goes on and gives him a bracha. What are some of the messages that exist in this verse? Kol kol Yaakov Yadayim Yidei Eisav. What is the deeper significance of this? This idea becomes, these words become more than just a single moment in history. They become almost a calling card for the Jewish people. We find this referenced throughout history. Kol kol Yaakov. The voice is the voice of Yaakov Yadayim Yidei Eisav. The Medrash says like this. Medrash says, Hakol kol Yaakov v'yadayim yidei Eisav. So firstly, there's a Gemara which says, Kol, the sound over here, the voice is the voice of prayer. That's what Kol is referring to. Yadayim, hands, is a reference to war. So the deeper meaning behind this pasuk is that prayer belongs to Yaakov and war belongs to Eisav. Prayer belongs to Yaakov and war belongs to Eisav. And the significance of that is, it says the Medrash, that any prayer, for a prayer to be successful, it has to have a little bit of, it has to have some, it has to include some of descendants of Jacob there. For a prayer to be really successful, there has to be the descendants of Yaakov included in that prayer. And for war to be successful, says the Medrash, it has to have descendants of Eisav involved in that war. Very fascinating. That for war to be successful, for one to be victorious in war, there has to be a little bit of Eisav there. So that's one point the Medrash takes about this. But there's more to it. There's another idea. There's another Medrash brought down like this. It says that Kol kol Yaakov v'yadayim yidei Eisav. Says the Medrash that there were two great prophets among the nations of the world. One of them was Bilam. The other one I don't remember offhand. And it says the nations gathered around these prophets, or gathered around Bilam, and said to Bilam, how are we to defeat the Jewish people? So we know the story of Bilam. The Jewish people left Egypt and they're on their way to Israel, and they're victorious in one battle after the other. And Bilam is this prophet, this sorcerer. And so they gather around Bilam and they said to him, how can we defeat this army? It seems to be unstoppable. How can we stop this army? And Bilam says, here's what you have to do. He says, go check out their synagogues and their study halls. He said, if you find them studying Torah and praying, then you're not going to defeat them. If you're able to catch them in a moment in which their prayer and their Torah is weakened, then you may be able to defeat them. And that's what he says. Hakol kol Yaakov, v'yadayim yidei Eisav. If the voice is the voice of Yaakov. As long as the voice of Yaakov is strong, then they are unbeatable. There is no way to defeat the Jewish people. If, however, their voices are weak, if the voices are not there, then yadayim yidei Eisav. Then the hands will be the hands of Eisav, and then Eisav will be victorious. So that's what the Medrash says, is that this pasuk illustrates the Jewish approach to victory. And this is so important, especially in a time of battle, which we are currently in. assume most of you follow the news, and there's talk this morning or last night already about a ceasefire in the war with Hezbollah in Lebanon, and so that's Baruch Hashem. Hopefully, that's a good sign for the Jewish people. But the war continues certainly in the south, and we'll see what happens in the north. And there's many fronts of war. But it's important to remember that even as Jewish people go to war, and there are brave soldiers, men and women who are fighting and fighting valiantly and fighting very successfully. But nonetheless, if we forget about a kol Yaakov, if we forget this, that the voice is the voice of Yaakov, and that's the real power of the Jewish people, we're making a terrible mistake. Our power is a combined effort of kol, starting with the voices of Torah, studying the voices of prayer. And then alongside that, we have the heroes who go and put their lives on the line to win the wars. But it's a battle that begins with Torah and prayer. The Gemara says it's about David HaMelech. In the later years, David HaMelech did not go out to war. Earlier on, he did. But later years, he sent his general. His general was Yoav. And the Gemara says Yoav went to battle wherever he had to go. And David remained in Yerushalayim in Jerusalem and prayed. And the key to victory was both of them together. Yoav's prowess in battle and David's prowess in prayer are what allowed the Jewish people to win war after war. And that's the ideal. That is the ideal when it comes to the Jewish people going to war. We have the power of Torah, the power of prayer, and the power of bravery of those who fight the wars on the ground. So that is one essential idea this pasuk conveys. But I'll share two more ideas from this pasuk. One, I think this is given by the Gerer Rebbe, I believe, one of the Gerer Rebbes, who says, why did it have to happen this way? And this is a question many of the Mefarshim ask, especially the mystical commentaries. Again, the mystical commentaries are looking for the deeper understanding of why things happen the way they do in the Torah. So the question comes up again and again, is if, and the way we say in Talmudic terminology, mimanashach. I'm not sure how to translate mimanashach into English, but basically like this. If Yaakov was intended to get the blessing, what was God's plan? If Yaakov was intended to get the blessing, so why did it have to happen through deception? And if Eisav was meant to have the blessing, so then how could Yaakov take it? Which is it? Was it meant to be Yaakov? So let it happen straightforward. Why does it have to be through deception? And if it's meant to be Eisav, so then how could Yaakov take a blessing? A blessing is a spiritual source, source of sustenance. You can't steal that. Just like you can't steal love, you can't steal fear, you can't steal hate. That which is metaphysical can't be stolen. How can you steal a blessing? Even the term stealing a blessing is bizarre. It just doesn't make sense. And the mystical answer is, David. Yeah, go ahead, David. You have a point to share. David.
Well, I didn't know it was rhetorical or what, but well, because Jacob was able to raise his level of Israel. That's why he was able to find an angel. The only way to be able to find angels is in the spiritual realm. And while Esau wasn't able to reach that level yet, some said that the Esau the achieved Shuvah, his head was buried with the patriarchs and the body somewhere else because of his sins.
Right.
But Israel, Jacob, did achieve it.
Right. Okay. So you're jumping to some of the mystical ideas of here. Very good. So let me share a few of those. Basically, according to the answer to this question, again, the question of if Yaakov deserves the bracha, it shouldn't come through deception. And if Eisav deserves the bracha, then deception shouldn't help. That's basically the question. And the answer is that for whatever reason, the bracha was designated for Yaakov, but would only reach him through deception. That's what was meant to be. It was meant to happen this way. God's blessing in this situation could only come to Yaakov as he was dressed as Eisav. So the Gerer Rebbe explains why. What's the reason for that? He says like this. He says, if Yitzchak, that is, were to give the bracha to Yaakov as Yaakov was Yaakov, as Yaakov was righteous, as he was himself, so then for the rest of history, that blessing would only be given to Yaakov's descendants as they were following in the path of Yaakov. Because the bracha was given to Yaakov in his state of holiness, in a state of genuine connection as Yaakov was. By Yitzchak giving, and by the way, these are very profound blessings. We say this every month of Shabbos. The fat of the earth, there's abundant blessing in here. By Yitzchak giving it to Yaakov, not as he was himself, but rather as he was dressed as Eisav, says the Ger Rebbe. This ensures that throughout history, the Jewish people, even a Jew that carries himself and looks like Eisav, will also be the beneficiary of the blessing of Yitzchak. That even as a Jew looks like Eisav, because the bracha was given to Yaakov as he looked like Eisav, throughout history you will come across Jews who don't carry themselves like Yaakov, who perhaps carry themselves more so like Eisav. But because the bracha was given to Yaakov dressed like Eisav, so even in history, even throughout history, as Jews, throughout the descendants of Yaakov, perhaps will change their look and sometimes will carry themselves in an unholy way, nonetheless, the blessing of Yitzchak should continue, because it wasn't contingent on Yaakov looking like Yaakov. And that's the great blessing in this circumstance as it happened. That's point number one. And then a second answer I heard, and this is something which perhaps is more relevant nowadays. This I heard, I believe, in the name of Rabbi Yosef Ber Soloveitchik, who was the head of the Yeshiva University post-World War II. And he says, what is the deeper significance of Hakol Kol Yaakov Ayidayim de Eisav? Is basically a message Jewish people convey to the world. And that is, Hakol Kol Yaakov. The voice is the voice of Yaakov. We tell the world, the voice, you want to know what our true identity is? Our true identity is Torah. Our true identity is prayer. We are people of the book. We're here to study. We're here to teach. We're here to teach the world. Not just study, but to teach. Our voice is our power. We convey ideas. We make the world better with the messages we share. But in the event that you want to come at us in battle, we can also put on the clothing of Eisav. We can also put on the clothing of Eisav and go to battle like Eisav. We know how to do that. Even though it's not our nature, and this is very important, even though the clothing of Eisav that we put on never becomes who we really are, but we know how to do that as well. That's how he says, that's the deeper meaning behind this whole episode, is that Yaakov says, yes, my identity is a Hakol Kol Yaakov. My identity is the identity of my children, my descendants after me. You want to know what we are? We are the voice. We are the voice that studies. We are the voice that teaches. We are the voice of morality to the world. We are the voice that gives a conscience to the world. That's what we're here. That's what we're here for. But in the event that we need to, and throughout history we will need to, we can also put on Esav's clothing. If that's what's necessary at the moment to defeat evil, then we could also put on we could also wear the arms of Eisav. We can take weapons. We can fight for that which is right. That too can be part of our identity. But that's never our true identity. That is just a garment that we wear upon us. The voice is who we are. If and when we have to wear the arms of Eisav, that's external to us. That's not who we are. And that's the message that the Rav of Soloveitchik shared on this topic, which again, very profound, because again, as we find ourselves in battle, as we find ourselves in a time of battle, we remind ourselves that when we go to battle, it's reluctantly. We go to battle, it's reluctantly. We're not people of war. That's not who we are essentially. We are not people who want to be in tanks and with guns and with weapons. That's not what we want to do. If we do it, we have to do it. We do it when we have to. We do it when we have to put on the clothing of Eisav. That's not our identity. Our identity is Hakol Kol Yaakov. And that's a deeper layer of understanding among many of this pasuk and of this whole event that takes place, in which it is orchestrated that Yaakov receives the blessing dressed as Eisav. All right, may we merit to see the peace and the victory, to be able to channel both the Kol Kol Yaakov. Never give up on never forget the power of Torah, the power of Tefillah, and thereby overcome the enemies that we face and continue to face. And may we merit the Geula Amitis Vashlema, the ultimate and complete redemption.